Okay, good evening everyone. It's Pasquale Pellegrino from Consortium of Piedmontese NGO. You should have found a postcard on your seat. There is a QR code where you can scan and find a very, very short questionnaire. It's about 2 questions, and it will help us with the monitoring of European project, which you can find also a short description in the form and on the postcard. Thank you and enjoy the talk. You don't need it.
Does this? Oh yeah, this works. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Max Pinckers. I'm an artist photographer from Belgium. Sitting next to me is Mr. Peter Njuguna. He's the chairman of the Mau Mau War Veterans Association Muranga. This is Mr. Paul Mwangi, the secretary of the Mau Mau War Veterans Association. And at the end of the table is Mr. Julius Kimari, the CEO of the Mau Mau War Veterans Association. I will first leave the word over to the chairman.
Thank you very much.
First and foremost, I want to say thank you to you for coming.
All the mokete adikia magatheti and our nation watu yote na aria angi maumite miena yothe ina ila yuma. Thank you.
The microphone.
All the people who have come from various other places. As a chairman and on behalf of my team, on behalf of the rest of the membership of Mau Mau War Veteran Association, I thank you very much for coming to this talk show. I thank the members of the press and the people of this great city.
Na niĩ ndĩraria ũguo ndĩna ngatho tondũ ũmũthĩ ndirĩ wa Muranga, ũmũthĩ ndĩ wa Terino.
And I want to express my gratitude and happiness that today I am not the ordinary man of Muranga County of Kenya, but a member of this great city of Torino.
Kuria kuri ariũ a maitũ na maitũ and their sisters.
Na de haha kumuhe ngeithi. I am also here to give them, sorry, I nearly almost spoke Kikuyu against Kikuyu. Now, he says that on behalf of all the people we left home, brothers and sisters who took part in the war, and our children and our grandchildren, we wish to express their gratitude too, because we have been communicating with them and we have been telling them how kind the people of Torino are.
Na leo tuli haha nigetha tumenye maheni maria twarehirwo ni kolonio na riu nitutaririo haha na ibuku riri na nio anyu mokete. I say thank you.
And our mission in this exhibition is to let you know through this book that we have written and in which we have participated as the people who actually took part in the war against the British colonialism, that the things we have put here are the actual things that took place. And if you may have heard other propaganda that we were not freedom fighters, then through this book, you will also now know our story.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, state of emergency, this project, this book that we published just about a month ago, started 10 years ago. It's a project in collaboration between myself and Mau Mau war veterans in Kenya, who are the Kenyan freedom fighters who fought against the British colonialists in the 1950s, between 1950 and 1960. But so 10 years ago, around 2014, I was invited into the Archive of Modern Conflict in London, which is a privately owned, quite obscure archive with an incredible collection. And they invite artists into their collection to activate it, to keep it alive. And I had the privilege to spend a couple of months in their archive, where I was eventually presented with a folder of materials dealing with the Mau Mau. Back then I had no idea what it was, but it was quite clearly, as you can see up on the screen, propaganda material produced by the colonial administration, which very much did their best to create a certain image around this group. The Mau Mau, according to the file at the Archive of Modern Conflict, were a band of very violent criminals who attacked colonial settlers in Kenya during that time. So as a speculative documentarian, the way that I like to see myself, as a documentary maker, a photographer, I've always been interested in how photographs relate to ideas of truth, how photographs can represent certain realities and the ambiguities around it. So propaganda, for me, was immediately an interesting departure point. And eventually I decided to go to Kenya to see or to learn more about what the Mau Mau is in Kenya. And it's there in 2015 that I had the privilege to meet Mau Mau war veteran associations, such as the association of Mr. Chairman here in Muranga, but there are a few different associations around the central region of Kenya where the battles took place. And when I presented the archival photographs and pamphlets and documents that I had seen in London to the Mau Mau veterans, we ended up discussing an idea for a project where we would work together to restage and to make new pictures to counter that narrative from the colonial archive, to create new documents, new images that tell a different side of the story. So that was the first departure point of the project. And so as I got more and more into this over the years and speaking with the veterans and looking at archival material, we also learned that just before independence, well, basically so what happened during that emergency period, and Mr. Julius Kimari and Mr. Paul will tell you more about that in a minute, is as a response to the freedom movement, the Mau Mau freedom movement, the British acted in a very brutal way. They ended up building a network of detention camps all around the country in which hundreds of thousands of people were detained who were believed to be part of the Mau Mau movement. There was a network of villages, villagization programs where women and children were kept under extreme circumstances in order to keep them from working with the Mau Mau fighters in the forests. And many were tortured and hanged, and atrocities happened all over the country during that period. But eventually the British were forced to leave, and Kenya attained independence in 1963. But before the British were evicted, so to say, they destroyed a very large part of the documents they had kept. So the British were very meticulous document keepers, record keepers. They wrote everything down, the lists of names and people, photographs of the camps. But in what became known as Operation Legacy, which is an operation that took place in many other colonies as well, they started destroying the evidence. So what is left of this archive is very fragmented and very much full of holes and very unrepresentable of what actually happened. Now, to skip forward, and this is an important part of a point we will make later as well, in 2013, a group of Mau Mau war veterans, other than the Muranga veterans, spanned a court case against the British government in a class action lawsuit to be compensated for the atrocities that happened in the 1950s. And that case was the first time in history that a former colonial power officially recognized what they did and also paid compensation to a very small amount of claimants. So it was an out-of-court settlement, so it wasn't an official compensation payment of about 5,000 people who received just around £2,000 each, which is a ridiculous compensation amount. But during that case, and I think this is one of the most important outcomes that eventually came from it, it was proven that the colonial government in 1963 secretly took a number of documents with them to London that they had kept hidden from the public until 2013. And during that case, the British government was forced to admit that they had this enormous archive of colonial era documents, not only from Kenya, but from all the other 37 colonies as well. And that's known as the Hanslope Disclosure. And those documents are now becoming part of the public domain. So they're now held at the National Archives in Kew in London. Not all of them, because they first have to be censored by former colonial officers before they can be made public. So to move forward a little bit, the way that we ended up working together, especially more intensively since 2018, Julius, more or less, when we started to really work together on a yearly basis almost.
Yes, just about end of 2017, but basically 2018 at the beginning.
So I went to the National Archives in London and I reproduced all of the photographs that I could find relating to that particular period, and many of them who only became part of the public domain after 2013. In the book, all of the documents that are reproduced like this, these open folders lying on a table, all come from that same collection. And so I made facsimiles, copies of about 1,200 photographs, and brought them with me to Kenya to work together with the Mau Mau veterans. So we would sit around the table, we would look at the documents, we would discuss them together, and then the veterans would decide which kind of scenes they would like to enact or stage that we would then photograph as a kind of filling up of these gaps of this fragmented archive or countering the narrative. And as a main approach to do this, we worked with what we like to call demonstrations, kind of more generally seen as reenactments, but we don't really like to use that term because we're not playing dress up. They're not trying to wear clothes from the time or use props or pretend, to be living in a certain time. They're more demonstrations because they're simply demonstrating how something was. And the power in that, I think, lies in the fact that they really experienced that time themselves. So there is no need to really reenact something because they themselves are the truth in these images, in these demonstrations. So the book basically weaves these new images, these demonstrations that we make together, like this one here that you also see in the exhibition, in which both Peter and Paul are featured, which Paul can maybe tell you a bit later about it. Or maybe now, Paul, maybe you would like to tell the audience maybe what Mau Mau means and maybe what is going on in this particular photograph.
Ladies and gentlemen of Torino, and all those who have come to this exhibition, I may say hello to you all and say thank you for coming to this exhibition. My name is Mwangi, and I'm the secretary of Mau Mau Veterans Association in Kenya, Murang'a County. Let me take this opportunity to explain about the word Mau Mau, because not many people who knows its meaning. Perhaps it may be attributed to other things, but I have to explain now so me understand. The word Mau Mau means this. First Mau, any letter has got its meaning. The first Mau means in Swahili, Mzungu arudi Uingereza. That means in English. An European may return to his own country, especially in London, because we are being ruled by British. The second Mau means Mwafrika apate uhuru. In order, I'm an African to get his freedom. May I repeat once? Mzungu arudi Uingereza. A British may return to his country. Mwafrika apate uhuru. That is its meaning. Then I thank the welcome we have been given in this city of Torino, and the people of Torino, to make an exhibition here, and let us to come from Kenya. We have come from Kenya so far. We have come over mountains, rivers, and lakes up to Torino for this exhibition. So to make it open, that is the things that were not known. It is open now, and it is time for everybody to know what is what, and to say that all the hidden things which were for propaganda and sayings is open now for everyone in the world to know. Thank you very much.
Audience. Once again, we are very grateful to you all for sparing time to come. And for those who have gone to the exhibition, to go and see the exhibition, and for those who have come to listen to our discussions here, for sparing your time and busy schedule to come, we are grateful to you all. Our coming to this exhibition, and we also thank the organization in Torino, who together with Max made the exhibition possible. At first, when we discussed about it in Nairobi, in Murang'a, actually, our office is in Murang'a, it was just like a dream. Will it ever happen? And we were arguing, asking Max, will they accept, with all the British propaganda that took place, what we have seen, and the documents you have brought to us, if the British made all this propaganda, the whole of Europe, that Mau Mau were not freedom fighters, they were terrorists, will any European country accept to host this exhibition? And also our book to be exhibited as a work of art and a work of search for what has happened in history. Then Marx said, well, everything requires to be tried. If you have something to say and you have a mouth, say it and leave the people to judge for themselves. And I said, that's all, fine, thank you. And so we started working with Max. At first, personally, I was a bit worried because I knew more about colonialism in other countries other than Kenya, than my elderly colleagues. And I know that Belgium was also in Congo, and there were atrocities committed there. I knew that the people in Kenya would ask me a question that I cannot answer easily, so I needed to settle it within myself and within my psyche. Why would you collaborate with a man from Belgium to discuss about Mau Mau and not a British person who probably may be more interested in it? And I answered that question this way first. Following the fact that the British took away records from Kenya, took away cultural artifacts to London, and at one time, the government, through the Ministry of Home Affairs, applied through the National Museum for the return of cultural artifacts and even some of the materials that we call migrated archive, because there are archives which were in Kenya, but they were taken away through that Operation Legacy. I answered myself and I said, first, there isn't a British person who has come to seek clarification from us, because they already have got their own idea about Mau Mau being a terrorist. So they don't want to work with the terrorists. They don't want to seek any facts. So they are comfortable to demonize us. So that's why they have not come trying to seek from us what our side of the story is about. Secondly, if I went to London myself to seek these materials as a Kenyan, I will never get it. So we thought that for Max, he has got that access, and because he can access those materials and other information that is hidden from us, then why don't we work with him and tell him our side of the story as a way of counteracting the British propaganda that was spread all over Europe in the 1950s. And so when we talked as members, we agreed that Max provided the best choice that we have in explaining to the world our side of the story. And our side of the story is this book, State of Emergency. State of Emergency, harakati za Mau Mau, za haki, ukweli, usawa, justice, truth, and equality. And if this book can shed light to the other side of the story rather than the British propaganda, then you'll be left to judge for yourself who was in the wrong, who went into whose house, and when he went to that house and he was not invited, what did he do? So if the owner of the house reacted, was he justified or was he not justified to react? Given those perspectives, then you will be able to make your own judgment. Mine here is only to persuade you that Mau Mau, Muzungu arundi Uingereza, Muzungu in our interpretation was not the common interpretation of the word Muzungu in Kiswahili. The Muzungu we were referring to is the British, not everybody. because not every European had hurt us. Not every European had committed atrocities to us or taken our things or occupied our land. Not everybody. The people who came and occupied our land are the British. The people who enslaved us are the British. The people who took away some of our materials, our natural resources, game hunting, trophies, and all these things, they were the British. So Mzungu arudi Uingereza actually meant the British to return to Britain so that the Kenyan African, the indigenous Kenyans can get freedom. So that was simple. That was it. And the idea of Mau Mau forming it originated from the fact that some of our fathers had been recruited by force by the British to join the King's African Rifles. And together with the British soldiers, they went to fight other countries like Burma, Malaysia, and other places like those. And while they were there, they had people like those in India were fighting for their freedom, for independence. And so when they came back home, they started talking to our fathers. After they came from the war, in 1945, in 1946, they started telling people, no, we should also fight for our independence. And that's how Mau Mau started. And it so happened that Mau Mau started in our country, in Muranga. Then by colonial names, it was called Fort Hall, named after the district commissioner of that time, called Francis Hall, who initially was a district commissioner in India. But when India became independent in 1947, he was transferred, he came to Kenya, and initially he was in Kiambu, a particular place called Kikuyu, along the railway line, the Mombasa, Kisumu railway line, or what was called the Mombasa-Uganda railway. So Francis Hall was transferred, came to Muranga. He was a very brutal man, very brutal. Killing an African to him was just like swatting an insect or a fly. So it was very brutal. And because of that, the people who had gone to war from Muranga and from within the Mount Kenya region started this movement of getting independence. So Mau Mau, basically from its philosophy, from its own origin, its architecture, and the institutions that supported it during that war was purely based on fighting for freedom. And freedom and independence of our country from the colonial rule. So our mission and our appeal to you all is to see us that way. And we have also come here, not as bitter men. We have been bitter, true. But we are no longer bitter, and we don't want to live in the past. We are asking the British government to do one thing that they always talk about freedom, about equality, about democracy, about equal rights. But we are asking them all those high-profile words, pious platitudes, should be backed by action. Do the correct thing. Do the compensation of the people you killed and maimed, or negotiate a restitution, And let us team together with the rest of the world to make the world better. The world now is faced with a crisis of environment. The world is experiencing very serious problems connected with climate change. If we do not act together on climate change, as Professor Wangari Maathai told us a long time ago, nature is very unforgiving. And if we act contrary to nature, nature will revenge. And when nature revenges, it will not revenge against Africa alone, or Kenya, or the Mau Mau, for that matter. It will revenge everybody. Therefore, we are part of our mission also is to appeal to all of you, to you all, men and women of goodwill, those with organizations that can team with us with some projects that we have of reforestation. Reforestation, our main job right now, is not so much about complaining about the British, but we are just saying it because the British, we need to put the record straight, but we don't want to dwell on that. We are not here to play victimhood. Far from it. We are not here to persuade you to hate British people, no. In any case, they left the European Union on their own, so you have nothing you can do about that. They want to be on their own, let them be on their own. So we are not here to tell you to hate them. They already hate themselves. So, but we are here to ask you, whenever you meet with them, please tell them, do compensation to the Mau Mau, or do the institution, and let us all team up together as men and women of this world, protecting Mother Earth as the people of Earth. Because if we don't do that, if we don't protect the Earth together, we are going to sink individually. Maybe the vagaries of climate change will start in my place. It might also start in Europe. You don't know what will happen. It could stop here, and probably the next best place you run to from that disaster will be Africa. It could start also with us, and we don't want to have any enmity, because it might be that when the climate change disasters started to happen, you might find us, all of us, coming to Europe temporarily before we all perish. So we have come to ask you, to beg you, to plead with you that let us all join hands together. Let us not live in the past. Let us come together and deal with the issues of now. Of course, it is important always to think in the future, but don't forget the history of where you have come from. Don't forget what has happened in the past, so that you avoid doing it in the future. And I think that is our mission. I thank you for listening to us. And we are okay, we are here with you. Here we have been added a few more minutes. You are free to ask any question.
Yes, I think we have plenty more to say, but now that we are here together, and it's a huge privilege to have the veterans themselves here. So if anybody has any questions or would like to raise any topics, now is really the time, so please feel free. It can be about anything, so.
or even anything you'd like to know about Kenya.
There's someone here in the front.
And by the way, I welcome you all. Come and tour the country. Come when you have some time, sometime when you want to take off some few days for the holiday, please. We have some very fantastic beaches, by the way. And we have a lot of wild animals, even now. And if you come around August, you'll see the migration of the wildlife. Millions of wild beasts moving across the River Mara and anything.
Okay, thank you for your presentation and for what you are telling us.
Yes.
I'm curious about the definition of the word terrorist, that it's something that it's spread in Western media and all over the world. So I'm really curious about how do you feel, how have you feel to be addressed by British media as terrorist?
Can you say that again? You want me to define terrorism?
No, I'm curious about how do you feel after more than 50 years from the movement, from the revolution?
Yes.
How do you feel about being addressed by British and Western media as terrorists, which actually it's not?
Yeah, I get it. Well, first of all, being called a terrorist when you are not one is an insult that is not only hurting to the mind of a person and to the heart of a person, but actually spiritually very, very, very demeaning. If a person who has come to your house to steal or to your land to steal, you chase him away, then he call you a terrorist. Then we need the British themselves to define what a terrorist is. 50 years, now it's not 50 years. In fact, we celebrated Kenya's independence, 60 years independence, 2020, last year. And for a long time, the British, because they wanted the support of the other Europeans who are in Kenya, circulated that propaganda around Europe that the Mau Mau who are fighting us in Kenya are not freedom fighters. They are not fighting for the independence of Kenya. We are taking good care of them. We have educated them. We have brought religion to them. Christianity. We have also, through Her Majesty's government, or His Majesty's government, they had brought medicine, and so they could not see the reason why we are telling them to leave our country. And when we started agitating for independence, and people like President Jomo Kenyatta, the late president, where people of Kenya donated money to send him to London to go and explain what was happening in the country, the killings, the chasing away of people. He was mistreated there. He was hit with rotten eggs. He was later on called a leader into darkness and death. And eventually Jomo Kenyatta came back to Kenya in 1949. And that's the time now the Mau Mau had already catched up. And the people who are now against the British started taking an oath to bide every able-bodied man from Mount Kenya region, that is Kikuyu, Meru, and Embu, to fight to free the country of the colonizers. It is that oath that the British concluded that it was an oath to kill them. But the oath was not killing, about killing. The oath was about doing everything possible, persuasion, reasoning out that we are all equal. Can we be treated as equal human beings? Because already they had a Kipadi system. A Kipadi system was something like, okay, yeah, it was something like this.
We have a photo.
Yeah, this is a medal given to our chairman by the government of Kenya, declaring him a hero for having participated in the liberation of Kenya as a Mau Mau. The British initially had something like this.
This one.
There. That was called Kipande. In Kiswahili, it was called Kipande. But otherwise, it is an identification. That identification was supposed to be worn by every Kenyan man, so that wherever you go, first of all, it is recorded that so and so, the holder of this, has been given permission to move from Murang'a or from Nyeri to such and such a place for so many days. So if you were found beyond those days in the same place, then you are arrested and you are jailed, hard labor for 6 months. No appeal, no nothing. Regardless of whether you missed bus fare to go back, you are arrested and you are killed. So it is those atrocities and the direct disregard of human rights that made the people of Mount Kenya region to, in any case, the reason why they took the initiative is because it is actually their land that had actually been taken over by the British. They stayed in the highlands, and the Kikuyus live in the highlands, and these were the areas which are very fertile for farming, for herding animals, and the climate was cool because it is near the two highest mountains of Kenya, that is Mount Kenya and the Aberdares. So both the areas are fertile, and that's why the agitation started within this region, because it is we who are thrown out of our land, and then they were taken. I'm explaining about the terrorism. When someone is calling you a terrorist, even after 50 years, is because the person is still very bitter. And is bitter for things that he oughtn't to have done, but he did it, and the people reacted against it. So, and because eventually he left, he will still continue calling you that to justify that the persons you see there, even if they pretend to be good, they are terrorists. But it is very bad for somebody to never call somebody a terrorist until you actually understand what is that person fighting for. What has made that person be what you are describing him. Only then you can understand. Right now, I do not know how to define terrorism in the context of Middle East. Believe you me, I don't know. I don't know who is a terrorist in the Middle East right now. And so maybe everybody will define a terrorist according to their circumstances. But for me, if somebody acts because he's being oppressed, he's not a terrorist. He can be anything else but not a terrorist.
Thank you, Julius. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, then I give you the mic. I was really curious about the pictures you were showing before. If you feel like to tell us what is behind the picture, the picture you recreate in state of emergency book.
Well, I'm just looking for a good example, maybe, a relevant one. But of course, the pictures, they all have their own, the demonstrations all have their own stories behind them, which are often represented as text in the book that are either a testimony by the people in or doing the demonstrations. Sometimes it's a group conversation that is reflecting on the process of actually making the pictures. That's also something that comes back throughout the book. So it really depends, and they're not all demonstrations either. Sometimes it's a portrait of somebody simply without performing anything. There are also many documents of places, mass grave sites, former detention camps, and so on. But maybe since Peter has gained quite a bit of fame by being on the cover of the program booklet with this photograph, maybe the chairman is willing to briefly explain what he's demonstrating in this picture.
Noega. Gwenda kuga uguo murona mbica ĩno ĩhana nĩ pati ĩmwe ya Toshas tondu mwanyitwo mwatwarwo njera detainers mwathia mukaneo karaĩ gagekĩrwo mahiga akaiyũra wagĩkua na kĩongo rĩu mũgathi mũmacĩte mũgeithĩtwo baka thĩinĩ wa posti mũgathiĩ mũgaita.
Okay, what the chairman is saying, thanks once again to you for coming. He is explaining about that photograph, this, which is here, which he enacted or demonstrated. This one is portraying part of the torture system that the British employed. When you are arrested and you are taken to the detention camp, you would be, there used to be some bucket, round bucket. You are made to fill that bucket, a round bucket, which could hold about 15 kgs of weight. You put stones, you put sand or soil until it's full. Then you are made to hold it on like that until when the master will say, put it down. And most of the men used to collapse under it. And when you collapse, because you have been holding it this long, maybe the heart cannot longer pump blood into the head, so you fall unconscious. Those who sustained it, you are supposed to hold it from 8 o'clock to 5. No break for lunch. It's after you finish that you are going to, and it's not lunch, porridge. That is maize meal cooked, soft. And then you are made to vow you are not going to repeat again to support Mau Mau or to do anything that jeopardizes Her Majesty's government, and that you are going to be royal. those kind of things, those are part of the torture system. He was recollecting what happened to himself, what he was done when he was arrested. So every picture has got those connotations. Yes, go on.
ino ni njĩra ya Kandungu huku nĩkuo ndarĩ video da display na guguo.
Yes, hiyo kamera yale part ya torture. Yeah.
As a quick example of another type of image, and I think it's also a beautiful story that speaks a lot about the way that the British would respond to certain things. This is a place called Tika Gardens, yes.
Yeah.
And here, where you see this tree standing, there used to be a giant mugumo tree. It's a fig tree. It's a sacred tree for the Kikuyu people. The mugumo tree. And there was a sage in the 1940s, Sage Mugo Wakiribu, who prophesied that when that giant tree would fall, when it would fall over and die, it would mark the beginning of the British departure from Kenya. This was in 1946. So the way the British responded was to fortify that tree by building a kind of iron ring around it and filling it with soil. And that tree was guarded 24/7 by guards, so nobody could approach it. And then eventually, just before independence, I believe 1 year before, the Mugumo tree was struck by lightning, split in half, and fell over. But that iron ring is still there today, only now with a new tree growing out of it.
Mogo Kefiro was one of the sages, Kikuyu sages. He had actually foreseen much earlier. He lived up to the turn of the century, and he had actually predicted or rather saw the coming of the white man. But he talked about white butterflies. And later on, Mogo Kefiro said, those same white butterflies are going to come with a snake-like animal that spit fire, swallowed the people in its belly, and then went all the way to the lake and spit them there. It was interpreted that he was referring to a train. He foresaw something like a train or something like that. And that was now what later on became the Mombasa-Uganda railway line, which passes through Kikuyu land. And it was interpreted that is. So this Mugumo tree, Mogo Kefiro, predicted much earlier in the 1920s, before he died, that the torture and the mistreatment we are undergoing, the sign that it will come to an end will be the falling down of that Mugumo tree. The Mugumo tree is in Thika. Thika is my hometown. And the Mugumo tree was struck by lightning in 1960. And when it was struck by lightning, it was splintered. By that time, our political leaders were already discussing the possibility of having the first Lancaster conference in London. By that time, in 1960, the British Prime Minister, Macmillan, had already experienced that the wind of change was coming, was sweeping across the world, not just only Africa, across the world, and that colonialism was not going to last long. we understand the British people did not like him for saying so, especially the settlers, because it seems like he was saying that they are not, the British government is no longer going to be funding them or something like that. But Harold Macmillan had already seen that the first African country to get independence was the Sudan. The whole Sudan, not north or south, the way Sudan was. It was the first African country under British rule to get independence, 1956. Then immediately thereafter, it was followed by Ghana with the Kwame Nkrumah. And then Kwame Nkrumah and Julius Nyerere, my late president, President Jomo Kenyatta, they had already formed the Pan-African movement. So that Pan-African movement and the way it was being handled from all corners of Africa, with people like Madeira in South Africa, with the people like Kauda in Zambia, Jomo Kenyatta in Kenya, we had Julius Nyerere, we had then Nkrumah in West Africa and other countries. He had already seen as a politician that the colonialism was not going to last. It was going to come to an end. When the Mugumo tree, therefore, split, everybody now became very much agitated that the independence must be given quickly. And I believe the British saw that it is no longer possible or tenable to think of holding any country in Africa as a colonial territory. And that's why the initiation of the first Lancaster Conference was held in 1960. Then another one was held in 1962, held in 1961, which culminated in the agreement to give Kenya to be free. And then in 1963, June, we had the first self-rule, which we call Madaraka Day, on June 21st. On June 1st. Then, 6 months later, independence was declared. And that is the happiest day of these men. The first, and it is on that day that he was given this medal last year, when a number of them were recognized by the government of Kenya during Uhuru Kenyatta's government. And during Uhuru Kenyatta's government, and a number of them across the country, and any other person, not necessarily a freedom fighter, but the else who participated in agitating for independence. And we have a lady from Mombasa who we called Menza, Makatalili Menza, and that lady did a lot of work in agitating for the people of Coast Province to also fight for independence of our country. It's okay.
I think we're running out of time a little bit, but we might have time for one more question, and we'll also be around a little bit after the talk. We brought a couple of books. We have only 4 books with us that we can offer for sale this afternoon, but they are also available in the shops of the exhibitions, Palazzo Madama, where it's taking place. But maybe if somebody has one last question for us, and then we can talk individually amongst ourselves. Afterwards, we'll be around.
Hi, thank you so much for everything you said and for providing the true side of the story. And I was just wondering if there is any, because you said that these photographs and this material that you recovered from the archive will not be bound to the National Archive anymore, but they will be accessible for people if I understood correctly at the beginning. And I was wondering if there is any plan to include your photographs and your stories alongside these documents, not just in the format of the book, which sometimes perhaps kind of like binds these works to be accessed only by those that look for them. But yeah, perhaps like literally creating some sort of like new archive that kind of, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. So one thing is that so the documents from London, for instance, are officially in the public domain. So anybody can go there. You're allowed to reproduce them. They belong to the public. But in fact, not everybody has access to them. For example, people in Kenya would need to take a plane, go to London, and walk into the National Archives to see them, because they don't digitize them. They don't give copies of these documents to the archives in Kenya. So they're actually deliberately probably made a little bit less accessible than they should be. So that's, I think, one thing. And there's been quite a few archive studies around it, that these so-called migrated archives should be brought back to Kenya, that they should be made accessible in many different ways. And I completely stand for that, but that's a whole other kind of battle, I think, that needs to be fought. And then secondly, your question about making the reproductions that I've made accessible. I've of course been thinking about that and how to do it, and I think online would be a very good way to do it, because it's free, it's accessible globally. But one of the most important things, and this has come from discussions with other artists and archivists working around the topic, is that it's very important that these documents are contextualized properly. So you can't just dump them on a website and expect, some kind of open access and everybody to do with it what they want, because much of the material is very sensitive. And you really need to understand what you're looking at before you can work with it. So it's a question of how to contextualize the archives, both from Kenyan historians and researchers as with European ones. And that's another, I think, step later down the process that we will be thinking about how we can do that properly with the right approach. Okay, thank you everybody for listening. Well done.
Thank you.
Well done, Chairman.